You ever get that feeling that there are hidden patterns running our world? That the rise and fall of huge empires or the sudden chaotic crashes of our financial markets, that they're not just random? What if they're all following some kind of unseen script? Well, today we are digging into a pretty radical framework that claims to have found that script, a hidden mathematical source code for reality itself. Let's get into it.
So, the big question this whole thing kicks off with is, what if the same mathematical law governs the life and death of every complex system, from ancient Rome all the way to modern Wall Street? Could they really be singing from the same hymn sheet?
And this is where it gets wild, fast. The Octum framework says the lifespan of a civilization isn't random at all. Nope, it's a product of its main climate cycle times a very specific constant, a number they call alpha. And when you actually run the numbers for, say, the Roman and Mayan empires, the correlation is over 99%. I mean, that's not a coincidence. That's a pattern so precise it's practically screaming at you. Okay, so that's ancient history, right? But what if this pattern isn't just some relic of the past? The framework argues that the exact same mathematical rules are pulling the strings on the complex systems we rely on right now, today.
So they take this idea and they point it straight at the financial markets. They measure this thing called market coherence. You can basically think of it as a stress test for the entire system. And what they claim is that right before a massive crash, that stress level always hits a critical tipping point, 0.72. And look at this, the 1929 Great Crash and the 2008 housing crisis. Both peaked almost exactly at that number before collapsing to a floor around 0.37. It's the same numbers, showing up again.
So this all forces you to ask the big question, right? The one this whole framework is built on. Are we looking at some kind of fundamental law of nature? A mathematical rule that just sets the boundaries for what can and can't survive?
And the framework's answer is a resounding yes. It says that constant we keep seeing in civilizations, in markets, it's all part of a single master key to reality, a universal constant that they've named Alpha 13.
Okay, so what is this Alpha 13? Think of it like a universal health meter for anything. It shows up in two really important ways. First, there's the 0.63 ratio. That's the sweet spot, right? That's optimal health, stable growth. But when a system gets pushed to its absolute limit, that ratio shifts to a critical tipping point, a danger zone of 0.72, the exact number we saw just before those market crashes. And this one constant defines a whole spectrum of stability. According to the documents, systems can fail in two main ways. They can go up the stability branch, becoming more and more rigid, too ordered, until they become brittle and just shatter. Or they can go down the destruction branch, falling into total chaos and decay until they just dissolve. Either way, stray too far from that sweet spot, and you're headed for collapse.
Now, this is where the theory gets really, really bold. Because it's one thing to explain the past, right? But this framework starts making some very specific, very testable predictions about our future by applying these numbers to our biggest global problems.
Remember this number, 0.72. This is the big one. According to the framework, this is the universal tipping point. It's the geometric line in the sand where any complex system gets pushed to the very brink of collapse.
And that brings us to its first jaw-dropping prediction. It claims the current market coherence index is sitting at about 0.68. Based on that, it forecasts a critical window for a massive systemic financial collapse between 2026 and 2028. That's the moment it predicts we will cross that 0.72 threshold. Now, this isn't some vague prophecy, it's a specific claim with a date on it.
And the climate predictions are, if anything, even more sobering. The framework lays out what it calls a quadruple climate cascade, basically a series of dominoes set to fall. It starts with coral reefs and Arctic ice in the next few years, which then triggers the collapse of major ocean currents, leading to global food crises, and eventually, it says, the failure of global governance. It's a chain reaction.
So the obvious question is, where on earth does a number like this even come from? How could one constant rule everything? Well, to answer that, the framework goes deep into theoretical physics, claiming this whole thing is hardwired into the basic geometry of reality.
All right, buckle up, because this is where it gets a little mind-bending. The whole theory is built on three main ideas. First, the universe is made by dimensions vibrating together in harmony, kind of like musical chords creating a song. Second, time isn't what we think it is. It's not a river we're floating down. Instead, time actually emerges from the speed of those vibrations. And third, all the fundamental forces we see, gravity, electromagnetism, they aren't really forces at all. They're just the geometric ripples created when these dimensions interact. And that leads to probably the single most stunning claim in the entire framework. If time emerges from these harmonic vibrations, then the nuclear fusion happening inside a star is literally a process that creates time. Stars are time factories, and black holes? They do the exact opposite. They are places where that harmony breaks down, where time itself is unraveled and, well, destroyed.
So from that fundamental, almost unbelievable idea, the framework just explodes outward. It tries to connect pretty much every field of science you can think of under one single geometric roof.
And I mean, the scope here is just staggering. It claims to link the quantum forces inside an atom to the gravitational waves of the cosmos, to the way our DNA replicates, the timing of mass extinctions in Earth's history, the cycles of civilizations and markets we've already talked about, and, yeah, even the emergence of consciousness itself, the whole shebang.
And to try and back all this up, the source material presents this chart. It's a summary of their claimed validation scores, and as you can see, they're showing incredibly high correlations across completely different fields. The whole point they're trying to make is that the same geometric rules are at play absolutely everywhere, from the tiniest particles to the biggest empires.
So let's bring this all back home. Because these documents aren't just presenting a theory, they're proposing a whole new operating manual for reality. So you have to wonder, what would it actually mean if any of this turned out to be real?
Well, the practical claim is pretty profound. The framework suggests that if we actually designed our solutions, our policies, to be in harmony with these underlying geometric principles, we could massively increase our chances of success. They say our current approach to climate change, for example, has a 43% chance of working, but policies optimized to this alpha 1-3 constant, that jumps to 78%.
One of the source documents really sums up the whole mission statement with this line. It frames this whole framework not just as some passive theory to be debated, but as an urgent, actionable tool that we're supposed to pick up and use. And that leaves us with this final, absolutely massive thought. The framework claims to have found the geometric DNA of existence itself, the source code for reality. So the question is, if it's right, what happens to our world and to us when we finally learn how to read the code?